Welcome back. Hey, it's Friday, the end of another week, but we're not done yet with National Stutter Awareness Week. Hey, it's a trigger, Rich Bontrager back again. 2 p.m. with the trigger, but this week it's been all about stuttering. As I've shared throughout the week, unless you're new, I stutter. I've had to overcome a stutter. They have an amazing broadcasting and television career, and I get to interview and talk with people all around the world, and I stutter. This week, now, it's not about my story. It's about other people's story. I've had amazing conversations this week, hearing what other people have gone through, how the stutter impacted them, their family, their career, and what they've learned through that and how they've navigated that. And we're going to have another great conversation here today. As always, the chat is open. Drop in questions, give my guests my love a little bit. And, of course, this is always replayed and shared back out again on our replay Saturday. So, without any further ado, let me introduce you an amazing guest here today, Eric Rogell. Everything you want is on the other side of bold. Think about that. That's part of what he talks about being bold, getting on the other side, strengthening, encouraging, and he really focuses on men. And interesting, more men stutter than women. The studies have shown men stutter more than ladies. He's from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Eric Rogell, come on in. Welcome to 2 p.m. with the Trigger.
Hey, Trigger, what's going on, man? You know, I love coming on and talking to you. We always have amazing conversations, and I'm excited for this one because this one's different than I think any other conversation you and I have had.
No, and have you talked much about your stutter with anyone in media and other conversations?
No, this is really the first time that I'm talking about it on a show like this. I mean, some of the men that I've worked with and clients, they know about it. You know, family and friends know about it, but it's not something that really comes up in the area where I am. And looking at it, there's every reason to talk about it. You know what I mean? Because so many men, like I mentioned to you before we went on, you know, I have a group that meets on Thursday nights, a men's group that meets on Thursday nights. And I mentioned I was going to be on here today. And one of the guys was like, well, I have a really bad stutter. And I overcame a really bad stutter. And so you never really know who you're talking to, who has really had to overcome this.
I was having a conversation with one of our guests earlier this week off camera, and I had mentioned that for some reason there doesn't seem the awareness this year versus other years. Why do you think we just don't put this out there? What's the hesitation of declaring I stutter or I've overcome it? Or why are we not pushing this out like some of the other action groups?
Yeah, I don't know. And that's probably, you know, above my pay grade on this. my feel on it, you know, not being an expert in it and those kind of things, I would just say my feel on it is it's not one of those things that I don't know how to put this the best way. I was going to say not debilitating enough to have that kind of attention, but for those of us that have stutters, it is debilitating when you're, you know, in the throes of it. So I don't know why it's not discussed as much. I think it's one of those. I know for me, it was horribly embarrassing, you know, growing up with one.
Yeah. So tell us about some of that. Where did your stutter begin? Impact? Just kind of share a little bit.
Sure. You know, I was a very quiet and shy kid to begin with. You know, in my work, I talk about there's two different ways you can be raised, especially for men. You can be raised in a culture of fear, or you can be raised in a culture of courage. And I was very much raised in a culture of fear. So I was raised to be afraid of everything. So I was a very sensitive, shy boy. And I had fears of speaking. And I think mine came from being afraid to be bold, to step up, to talk. And when I did, I would stutter and then people would just interrupt me. You know, it's one of those, I don't know if that happened to you, but I would stutter
all the time. They wanted to put the word in my mouth for me.
Correct. Right. And so I would just speak as fast as I could because I wanted to get it in. And I think it was also a little bit of the fear came in that. And for me, the letters that gave me the most problems were R's and W's. So if a word or a sentence began with an R or a W, I would trip over it. My name has two R's in it. My last name begins with an R. So I would just trip over my own name. And then, of course, that became funny. And then the other guys would make fun of me and mimic you and all those kind of things. So for me, I just stopped talking. I didn't really, think to speak in groups, especially. And so, that to me kind of just piled on my shyness, my wanting to be quiet, wanting to not stand out. And it really kind of kept me like that for years, throughout my childhood.
Did your family come to an understanding of family dynamics is one of the areas they say does impact the stutter. Like you said, the confident, the strong family, you are a little bit shyer, reserved. They say that some of that does play into how we present, how we come across. And that was my family. It sounds something that was kind of your influence. What did they do when they figured out he stutters? Did they come
Yeah,
alongside you or what?
I don't think that's a great question. And I'm really looking back into it. And I honestly don't think that I got any attention on it or help from it with my family. I think I hid it fairly well. And I think it
Mm,
was one of those things where, I was, like I said, raised in a culture of fear. And one of the things was I had to be perfect. That was one of the things mom was always like, you're going to embarrass me. If you're not perfect, you're, a reflection of me. And there was a lot of pressure. So I think I was very quiet and tried to hide it as much as I could. And I remember being in elementary school and them coming in and taking one or two of the students out. And I was asking, where are they going? And they were like, oh, speech therapy. They have a lisp or they have a stutter. And I was like, I need that. Why am I not getting that?
Did you go then? Did you have
No,
formal
I
training?
did not. I didn't. And it wasn't one of those things. And I think, and again, I'm not 100% sure, but I may have had conversation with my mother and said that I wanted to. And it was like, you're not perfect. Like, we can't let anybody know that you have a stutter because then you're not the perfect boy anymore. So there was a lot of that. But here's the positive end of that. And first of all, I always preface these things when I talk about my parents or my mom like that is
Yeah.
I love my mother. She was an
Oh,
absolutely amazing woman. She was just doing what she felt was best at the time
exactly.
with the tools she had. She didn't know. So,
Yes.
I don't blame her and I don't, put her down. She was just doing what she thought was best. But at that moment, Trigger, I think what really happened for me was when I saw those kids leave and go to speech therapy, in my mind, it told me, well, this can be fixed. This is not something that I'm going to have to suffer through the rest of my life. I can fix it. And for me, two things happened. One, I realized I stuttered more when I was trying so fast, right? When I was
Yeah.
excited or trying to get the words in before somebody would interrupt me.
Yes.
And I just practiced that. I knew it was the W's and the R's, say my own name. I
Hmm.
would say words with, because even asking a question, what begins with a W? And it would come out like, what, what would, and then people just jump in. They don't want you to go. So for
Right.
me, it was slow down, focus. What? Get that word out first, and then everything else will flow. And secondly, when I got out of high school and I was going to college, one of the decisions I made was nobody in college is going to know who I am. They didn't grow up with me. So they didn't know I was this shy, scared,
Yeah.
stuttering kid. I could be anybody I wanted. So I really practiced and I really looked at, how can I slow down? How can I be more confident with my speaking? How can I get past those R's and W's? And it worked and it was great. But listen, I'll tell you, I still to this day, when I get really tired or really angry, it'll come back out.
So you've mentioned a lot of really good gems in there, and the
Sure.
speed at which we want to have the output, that was part of my thing too, was the more excited, the more I got into the conversation, like I have something really valuable. And my brain is like literally on fire thinking, just get it out, just get it out. What I found was I had to come up with the speed rate here and the speed rate in my mouth, and I had to find where the two met. Because
Mhm.
when it did come out like that flash, like you were talking about, it was a disaster.
Yeah.
But now you've learned the tricks of slow down, figure that out. When you look back on that, was that something you think you could have learned through therapy, or is that something you had to learn on your own?
Well, I can't really answer that because I didn't go through therapy. So I
Right.
don't know what they would have done. Would it have happened faster? My feeling is it could have happened faster. But for me, it was decision, right? And that's what made it so strong and powerful for me. It was like, I don't want to do this anymore. This is, it's hurting me. It's embarrassing to me. And like I said, knowing other kids were going to therapy gave me the confidence that it could be fixed. This is not, a life sentence. This can be fixed. And so I'm looking at like, how can I fix it? And for me, that young, there's no internet back then,
No.
right? So you had to kind of figure it out. And I may have had conversation with some of the kids that were going to speech therapy. Um, a lot of them were going for lisps rather than stuttering. But I think I may have had some conversation with them. I may have just sat and practiced
Mm.
what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And as I got more confident in that, I think it became less and less and less. And there are times, I'll be honest with you, Trigger, I forget that I had a stutter when I was a kid.
Wow.
A lot of the time, I just forget that that's it. And it'll come out once in a while and I go, oh, it's going a little fast. I was getting a little, you know what I mean? I can feel it tripping up. But for the most part, it doesn't run me anymore. It's not like it did when I was a kid, where I was always conscious of starting a sentence, being
Mhm.
whatever. It's just become natural now.
Well, and I know this. We're both avid readers. You and I both talk about some of our book collections, and they overlap. As a reader, the reading was the hard part growing up. That's where the ridicule came from me.
Mm,
I mean, even the C. Dick Run books, C. Jane Run, I couldn't do them.
mm,
And the laughter and the jokes would start in the room, and I leave the room just crushed.
mhm,
But we both now lead. We both are speakers.
mhm.
Did you preview your reading in advance, or did you just, when it was time to read, cracked it open or read for it? Because I found the less I prepared to read, the
Mhm.
better I was, because I would prepare it, and then when it came live, my mind would go, "Oh crap! Now everyone's watching." Did you go through that?
No, it's interesting that you say that. I never experienced that with actually for me, reading out loud in class was actually better because I could be slower and more deliberate. Right. It was when and like what you said, when my mind was racing like that, and it was, trying to get from here to here as fast as it could, that tripped me up. And when I was reading it, I could relax a little bit and just go slower. So I was okay with it. I did find though, when you talk about speaking, for me, the more I rehearsed, I think it was harder for me because it felt more like static.
Yes.
If I just kind of had the ideas, and I learned this, I did some competitive. I know this sounds crazy, competitive storytelling a few years ago. I found out that there was a woman that I was dating, and she was going to compete in this storytelling thing, and I went, "Wow, that sounds fascinating." I would look. And she gave me this great book on. If you ever heard of The Moth, that wonderful series. I think NPR plays it
Oh, okay,
radio.
yeah.
And they're great stories, and they're told live, and they're real
Mhm.
true stories. So I started listening to The Moth, and I was going in to do the storytelling. And in the book that my friend had given me or recommended to me to read before getting on stage and telling a story and this was interesting because there's a time, not only a time limit, but a time range. Like it had to be at least this long and not any longer than that. So you had to really hit that thing. So in the book, the author was a champion storyteller. And she said in the book, don't memorize your story, chunk it.
Yes.
Remember chunks. And then that chunk will trigger the story that will
Mhm.
go. And I found in any type of speaking that I do now, whether it's on a Zoom call with, some clients, or whether it's on stage, or if it's a podcast, I chunk things now because to me, when I can just remember the chunk, it's very natural and easy to just speak it rather than try to remember the exact words. That will trip me up a lot.
No, and I found the same thing because that rehearsal that when I was going through broadcasting school, my college professor said, "You have a great voice, but no one will hire you because you can't read the news." And he's true. I cannot read
Uh,
that teleprompter and take someone else's words
mm,
and make it mine. And plus, I get just too darn emotional because I hate the tragedies, and I hate the tragedies, so the emotion hits me. But I found that I could do exactly what you're describing. I could have a bullet point, and
mhm.
I can ad lib, and that's why I got into sports work because it's all ad lib. It's all just storytelling. So there is a freedom of finding your own words instead of reciting the words that I think is a part of a key of that too.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. And again, like we said at the beginning, I talk about being more bold, right?
Yeah.
And everything you want's on the other side of bold. And it's, that's kind of a little fun tagline, but it is the truth. Because for me, the end of stuttering was on the other side of being more bold, more confident, right? Um, for me, being able to get on stage and speak was on the other side of bold. I had to be more bold and more confident. So I think, for anyone who is still stuttering and doesn't know where to turn, I would say just practice. Get that confidence in here first. Once you get that confidence, it'll start to flow out. And look, like I said, I will stutter every once in a while. I'll trip over a word. Sometimes I'll say "and" 6 times. I'll go like and. You know what I mean? Like that. And then I'll just make a joke about it or not even acknowledge it. Just too bad. I just stuttered. Who cares? We're moving on. Right. And just do it that way. And it happens once in a while. And that's it. It just does.
You know, and I know you don't make it sound easy with the boldness, but sometimes it sounds easy to just be bold. But the impact of stuttering is you feel anything but bold.
Mhm.
You feel like you just slammed on the brakes and you're in reverse, whereas bold is go forward. And that's why I like your approach of you got to keep going forward. But that boldness is something I wanted. Many people want.
Mhm.
But when you have the stutter, it's like I don't feel it. I don't
Yeah.
feel anything bold at all within me. Go further with that a little bit. What is this boldness you're talking about?
Sure. I mean, listen, there's a lot of great definitions of bold. Courageous is one, right? And that's the one I love the most because in my work, and you know this because we've spoken about it, we have what we call the sacred 7 core values, the core values that you live with as a human being. And ours start with courage is the very first one. So they're courage, honesty, integrity, commitment, duty, honor, and love. And courage is first because without it, you can't get to any of the others. Right? If you don't have courage to be honest, you're just not going to be honest. Right. So courage is a big one on bold. So I would say just be courageous. Right. You think about that courage first, the courage to speak, even though you have the stutter. And one of the other things about being bold is that self confidence. And this was a big one for me. And this one's not quite as easy, but it's one of those things where you don't care what other people think. I don't care if you make fun of me for stuttering. I don't care if I stutter in front of you. I'm just being me, number one. And number two, it doesn't matter if you laugh at it. That's on you. If you're laughing at somebody who's stuttering, that just shows me what kind of person you are. Right. So I can laugh at it and make a joke about it, but not you. Right. I don't want to hear. And if you do, it's not going to bother me. I'm not going to care. It's getting past those things that lead to that boldness. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and several of the guests this week have talked about that very thing. There came a point where they said, "I'm me.
Mhm.
I'm okay with being me."
Yes.
You guys have to figure out what you're going to do now, which is the other side of the coin. A lot of people don't know what they do. They do feel like they want to help. They're just lost. But there comes a point where they're finally going, "I'm okay."
Yes.
And I think that's a huge step. And again, it's that boldness to admit it, to be there. And the boldness becomes, I really don't care anymore. I'm going.
That's it. It's just the courage to continue and the audacity to go, I'm going to get on stage. And if I stutter, who cares? And for me, just being okay with it kind of lessens it. The more I was anxious about it, conscious of it, the worse it was. The more I was like, whatever. If I stutter, I stutter. Who cares? The
There's a
easy.
lot of freedom that comes when you get there.
Amen. That's a great way to put it. A lot of freedom. Boldness leads to freedom. Think
Yes.
about that. Think about all the, the handcuffs we put on ourselves, not wanting to be bold, holding ourselves back, keeping ourselves from doing what we want to do because we don't step into that boldness, right? So it's one of those things where you talk about how to get to boldness, just practice it. Practice courage. Just practice going into things that scare you. For me, I'll tell you this is a funny story, but I was deathly afraid of the phone when I was a kid.
Yes.
Deathly afraid of the
Yeah.
phone. I would not make phone calls. We didn't have FaceTime back then. We didn't even have caller ID back. You had no idea it was on the other
No.
end.
No.
And I was afraid that if I started to stutter, they'd be laughing at me on the other side and they'd be making comments that I couldn't see or, whatever it was. So I just did not want to use the phone.
Yeah.
So for me, more bold meant I'm going to make these phone calls. I'm going to contact these people. that was a big step. And for some other people, like I have friends that are, in the sales profession, they're like, "You're afraid of making phone. I do that all day long. That's nothing." But for me, it was terrifying. So find that thing and move forward. Practice being more courageous, more bold, more audacious.
Having you bring up the phone just brings back a flood of memories. Uh,
Mm.
I'm seeing my kitchen in the house I grew up primarily. I know exactly where the phone is, and I can remember because we were taught, "Hi, I'm Rich Bontrager. How can I help you?" Or "Thanks for going to the Bontrager house," something like that. And again, the R's and the B's, like you said way back at the beginning, these R's are painful. "Hi, and it was like, oh crap, I can't even answer my darn phone." And you're
Yeah.
right that I again, that's one of those things that, as simple as that sounds to many people, you can't even answer your own phone.
Right. And yeah, and it's so that those are the kind of things that I think people don't understand that stuttering leads to, right? And which is, we go back to why isn't there as much awareness about it? Well, listen, it's one of those things people don't think it's very debilitating, but it can be, depending on how bad your stutter is. We got a great comment in the thing, Rich. I would
Yeah.
love to address it. It's, the courage, the boldness leads to freedom and a slap in the face sometimes. Absolutely. And here's the thing, doing it anyway, right? In with the chance you might get slapped in the face, that's
Yes.
bold, right? Because courage, remember, courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing it in the face of fear, right? I love John Wayne's quote where he said, courage is, being scared to death, but saddling up anyway.
Yep.
So, I would say that kind of addresses that.
Eric, I'm curious as we wind down our time,
Sure.
being that this has not been an interview discussion for you, how does it feel now having 20 plus minutes talking about your stutter? How does that feel to think you've zeroed in on a pain point from years ago?
Yeah, it's amazing. And any time, and I tell people this all the time, it's the holding it in that causes the pain. Anytime you can just be open, courageous, be bold, talk about what it is, talk about your experiences. And this is one of the things I do on stage all the time. I'll do, um, you know, um, micro workshops when I'm on stage and have people, and I'll ask them, what's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you? And then say, who wants to talk about it? And I get hands and people that, I've had people where it's funny. And I had one recently where a woman got up and said, she was in her getting close to 50. And when she was 16, she tried to kill herself. And nobody knows, like members of her family didn't know. She'd been holding this for 30 some odd years. And she told a room of a couple of hundred people. And the tears and the emotion and the breakthroughs and the other people who raised their hand and said, look, I did the same thing when I was young and I never told anybody. I've been carrying that my whole life. When you finally talk about it, it's really not a big deal. And it's a release and a relief.
Yes.
So sitting here being able to talk to you about this and just saying, yeah, I mean, hopefully not so much even for me, Rich, because look, my life's been an open book for years. In the
Yeah.
work that I do, I'll just answer any question. But knowing that this may give someone else the courage to kind of just say, yeah, man, I stutter too. And here's what it is. That's the key thing. Or a young person who's in it right now and doesn't think it's ever going to end and is putting up with the bullying and the teasing and all of that, to know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So many of us have gotten over this. Reach out. And if you're going through it, reach out to me, reach out to Trigger. We're happy to talk to you.
Exactly. And again, the social media contact information is in the chat. We'll be resharing, reposting it. Eric Rogell, thanks for joining me here today as all part of the National Stutter Awareness Week. And I Stutter will continue on Saturday. What we're going to do on Saturday is we're going to do the replays of all the interviews, and that will be on the business plays for Rock Stage Media, and we're going to replay all those. Of course, they are on the YouTube channel and other places as well. As we wind down today, I do want to highlight one more celebrity that you may not know stutters. Emily Blunt, an actress. She was in Snow White and The Hunter's Man, the Quiet Place, Part 1 and Part 2. She was the Mary Poppins Returns. But she says this about her stutter. She said, I think it's very moving force. She said, if you can't express yourself and you can't be yourself, and there's something very poignant and freeing about learning to come to grips with your speech impediment. because it's a part of the imposter syndrome that lives in our body. She goes on to say that she is happy to share her story. She now credits a school teacher for helping her manage the stutter through acting. Acting actually unleashed her stutter. She's also now sitting on the board of the directors of the American Institute for Stuttering, another actor that is not hiding it, but sharing it to help other people move forward. That's going to do it for today with 2 p.m. with the Trigger. We'll be back again next week, Monday, join us at 2 p.m. Eastern Time as we go live to help you shine on camera and shine on stage and rock your stage. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back Monday at 2 p.m.